Welcome you to the Briggs Opera House. We have a particular sense of ownership in this place because as a community we built it. And for the campaign this year, it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to say, this is the house that Matt Dunne built. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Have you ever heard me tell this story? Has anyone ever heard me tell? No. Because I'll tell the complete version if you haven't heard. But having launched a couple of concerts and reviews in here, Dick McCormick and others participated, it was still just a blank slate, big old open rectangular room. And on one fateful day in the summer of 1987, a couple of fellows ambled into town on their way to the famous Champlain Shakespeare Festival, and they said to the lady over at the diner, Mary, I want to see where Meryl Streep performed. Well, it had something to do, well, it had everything to do with the fact that she had helped Dartmouth go co-ed, and while she was in town, she participated in some summer stock theater. But it was a myth that she had performed here. She'd performed in Stowe and Mount Snow and Killington, and they had struggled to get a venue in Woodstock, of course, not White River. But it ended up that same company ended up doing some of the initial theatrical work here. They were called Green Mountain Guild, but she had never been here. Nevertheless, the perception had leaked through to these guys that were from St. Louis, of all places. And they came looking, and Mary said, oh, I don't even know where the theater is. Why don't you go ask Dave Briggs? He knows everything, which wasn't a compliment. And so when they said, I want to see where Meryl Streep performed, I said, well, I know what you're talking about, so let's go up there. This big, open, cavernous room. And they said they were on their way, having been in college together and done some community service, to forming their own theater company. They said, well, why don't you come to White River Junction? And they went away, and they came back by phone, and they said, we heard what you said. We think we'd like to give that a shot. Well, it turned out they were the famous Steve Leon, Steve Legavietz, and they gave way to the White River Theater Festival. We embraced them with what was called River City Arts. And over a 10-year period, it gloriously grew to $1 million a year experience, and they had to go to mothballs, and out of that came Northern Stage, which has a triumphant moment coming up this week. Well, to get their first show here, they showed up in something like late March, early April, with just an empty room, and we built these risers in time for an opening in June. And one of the young groupies, if you will, was Matt Dunne. And we all pitched in, and we went to Aubuchon's and bought 2x4s and nuts and bolts and you name it. This riser you're on looks like the bridge on the River Kwai, if you ever look at it. It's phenomenal. And you can tell it hasn't sagged all these years. It has integrity like Matt does. He's a nuts and bolts guy. And Matt fell so much in love with this place, and I'm being serious, that when River City Arts had to be mothballed, he stepped up and kept it going until Brooke came to town, and we worked it all out to where Northern Stage would be the successor. He bridged that gap. So he's a guy that gets in the middle, in the breach, and makes things happen, and keeps them happening, and we'll never forget him for that. So that's my Matt Dunne story for you. It puts every time you come here, put this place a little more in context. I'm going to turn the evening over to our town chairs, Don and Sue Foster. So they'll be your MCs for tonight.
Hi, well, I'm Don Foster. I'm the newly re-elected chair of Hartford's Town Democratic Committee. And actually, Susan is the power behind the throne because she's my editor. I debated about saying something nice about Matt, because when I was courting Susan, I would find these really I think they were called the hunks in the attic. that Matt supplied Susan with an endless supply of really good-looking young men who turns out to be at our home, which was then Susan's home, to help with his campaign. And I don't know what made me say this or do it, but I said, well, if we need more of those, fine, but maybe we should have some women as well. So I'm just shouting out to Matt to thank you for keeping my fiance entertained until I could get there. I'm going to say a few words not as the town chair, but in my other hat, which is I'm on the faculty at Columbia University Teachers College. And so I'm really interested in what somebody who's running for the governor of Vermont has to say about education. I would like to believe that without education, nothing really is going to change. And we've heard a lot in the last few years about education in this state. Most of it, I think, pretty unimaginative. It's all been about numbers and not people. And it's all been about how can we do something because we're getting, there aren't as many students here, so we'll continue to think that there won't be, and so we'll come up with some plans which will save us money. I think that's totally, if you'll pardon my French, ass backwards. I think what you should really be thinking about is a positive approach to education. And Matt Dunne is the only candidate running who has written intelligently and thought outside the box about ways to do that. From my love, which is early childhood education, where he has put an emphasis on the fact that without early childhood education and intervention, you're not going to get all the other gains in education. And without early childhood education, you're not going to spot those kids who need help early on, so that later on, they're not going to be very costly to the school system because you're going to get them when you need them. Another thing that early childhood education does is it involves parents. And Matt wrote a paper that talked about keys to good education, and parent involvement is critical to that. If you look at the Head Start research that's now longitudinal and carries kids right through to high school, the one secret ingredient, not so secret maybe, for Head Start success was getting parents who themselves had, for the most part, poor experiences in education. The ones, if you're a teacher, on Parent-Teacher Day, you say, gee, surprise of surprises, all the kids who are doing well in my class, those parents showed up. But where are the parents who I really need to be talking to? And those parents traditionally don't come to a school because it's intimidating for them. Early childhood intervention has changed that, with parents getting involved and working through that system. I could go on about all the other really innovative and wonderful outside-the-box suggestions and plans that Matt has, everything from investment in higher education through more ways that include matching people to jobs, that including using the technology that's available or that should be available, so that we end up not having to give up our local schools for the kids, but that we can do what I think my hero when I was studying education was a guy from Vermont named John Dewey. And I think we need to do two things simultaneously. We need to go back to our roots, which made Vermont such a unique and wonderful place, and we need to combine that with what we know about technology and the future. So I'm proud to endorse a guy who has education in his DNA. If you knew, lucky enough to have known his mom or his mom and dad in-law, you're talking education is there. So Matt, thank you. I'd like to introduce my wife Susan, who can tell you later what kind of hunky guys she'd like to have.
of all, I'd like to say that Matt had asked us if we'd say a few words. David saying we're MCs came as quite a shock. I'm not an MC. I would like to back up everything Don had said, because early childhood education is a real concern of mine, because it's pretty well proven now that much of the brain development happens before the age of 3. And so if we don't get parents reading to children, and they've done studies that showed that children who are read to and talked to using adult language, not baby talk, have, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of words more that they know. But Don has covered that well. I like most of Matt's ideas, but one of the things I especially like is when he talks about developing the downtowns. I would like to see the downtowns of all the towns in Vermont developed so people can come down, they can walk from place to place instead of using some of our pasture land and forests to put up sprawling shopping centers, which generally have big box stores that aren't that good. And in downtown, we may have local stores, which is good. Also for the ecology, the rail and air travel that Matt wants to help support, because we've got to pay more attention to the ecology. And I'll end by saying that one of the things Matt said was turning our aging sorry about that, turning our aging demographic into an economic asset. As a member of that aging demographic, you know what I mean? I'm glad to think that he thinks I can be an asset. Oh, just one other thing. I housed someone who helped him set up his campaign last time, and then somebody who was trying out to be his campaign manager. That didn't work, and then I housed his campaign manager for 3 months. And somebody was at the house one night when one of them, Liam, came in and said, "Hi, good night." And then he sent an email to all our friends that said, "Susan is housing a hunk up in her attic." He was very different.
I'm proud to introduce our next speaker, Rebecca White, and I have to tell you a funny story. Rebecca is our new select board member. I like to say, if you go to a meeting, you'll see one person at least is awake during those meetings whom we elected, and that in many ways, in all ways. And she's now also our new secretary for the Town Democratic Committee. But I have to tell you a classic Vermont story. I was with Susan on a voting day, and our job with a group of other folks was to look at all the write-ins. And some of those write-ins, please don't write in Mickey Mouse again, folks. I'd much prefer Donald Duck. But I couldn't help but look up and see how Rebecca was doing against a couple of good old boys. And I just happened to sit with a whole table full of Republicans. I grew up in a Republican family, I should add, when Republicans were sane. And these folks were doing exactly what I was doing, was kind of getting a quick head count of how are their two guys doing versus how's my woman doing. And so the conversation was very quiet, and you'd hear very quiet things like, "Oh shit," "Oh good," "Oh shit," "Oh good." And so they kind of forgot that I was the Democrat at the table. So they started talking about how this would be a terrible, terrible choice, because she's young, she's a woman, she's been at college, it's going to equal a lot more taxes because she's going to care about people. And so I said, as a good Vermonter, anyone been to Tip Top Restaurant recently? And folks said, oh yeah. I said, do you ever see those really beautiful black and white photographs of the town? And they said, oh yeah. I said, that's her uncle who did those. Her uncle did those? Huh. And so is she from Wilder? And I said, oh yes, umpteen generations of Wilder. So they said, she might do okay after all.
Thank you, Don. When Don told me that story, it was a great point because it was during the recount. So knowing that there were people like Don counting the ballots, but also people who were taking it extremely seriously was a good thing to know. So first off, I'm extremely honored that I was invited to speak. I'm elected to the select board in Hartford, which after finding out that I wanted to run, discovering that, I Googled how many people were actually living in Wilder, and there's just about 10,000 of us in Hartford. And I thought, how can I properly represent 10,000 people who the majority of are actually far older than me? And I had a lot of questions about how can I actually represent people who I don't have the same age group or age range with. And I thought, who can I look to as a role model for someone who is properly able to represent Vermonters, even though they're not, the average age range of 40 up. And one of those people was Matt. And that's because he was elected to the House of Representatives at age 22. And even though I'm nowhere near 22, only 21, I think that it's so important to have people in your community who can lead you by example, and really show that there is opportunity out there. So one really important thing about being elected to the select board that happened was that there was a recount vote. And that put a lot of, I think, worry in my mind that maybe I shouldn't have run in the first place. And during that time, I spoke to my mom quite a bit about my concern. And she said, well, you should talk to Matt Dunne. you should get a meeting with Matt Dunne. You should talk to people really to build your confidence. And I was like, oh, I'm way too nervous. I can't like call Matt Dunne on the phone, Mom. And then I got a Facebook message from Matt Dunne asking if he wanted to go to lunch. And I was, of course, nervous. But my mom actually had one of Matt's kids at her daycare, so it felt a lot more relatable at that point. So going to that meeting, it really solidified for me why I look up to Matt, and really we need his type of personality in the position of governor. And that's that he instilled a lot of confidence in me while also giving me direction and advice that has made my experience, although short on the select board, so much easier. And I think one of the most important things he reiterated to me was that it's going to be extremely difficult at first. And as people have told me, the learning curve is straight up. So it's been really great to have a member of our community be as supportive. And that's really why I support and endorse Matt Dunne, is the fact that he is so willing and able to lead by example for young folks and people who don't generally take part in the democratic process, whether that be in Vermont, people of color, or people in low-income situations, where they don't feel confident or don't feel like they can take the opportunity to be in politics or to voice their opinion. But Matt really makes it clear, if you know him person to person, that he will support you. But also his campaign is based on the fact that we need to have people like myself and like people of color, women, and just anyone who previously wasn't white male or over the age of 65 in positions of real leadership. So that's really why I endorse him, and I thank him so much for his support and the work he's done for Hartford. So, woo!
Kevin, are you going to say anything? I know you're afraid of a microphone. Here, I'll come up with it. Now, I'm standing up here because Kevin has a habit of making me cry. So,
Well, I was trying to decide how I was going to do I was talking to my wife before I left about what to say this afternoon. And I said I was going to play off of what had been said before me. And I think everybody here knows why we're here and knows why we support you. The piece that I guess makes me feel very proud is in 1973, when your dad brought you to my garage, and he decided to be my attorney, and I decided to be his mechanic. And that started a very long and cherished relationship, with Matt and his family. And the character that we all see here now has been developed over time. And we look at what we have before us, in the next governor of the state of Vermont. A person who Faith and John Bailey Dunne would be so proud of, as I am. So and I guess, there's not a lot else, to say. We all know his resume. His resume has prepared him very clearly for this job. You look at each position, you look at his degree from college, you look at the work that he's done, not only, as a representative and a senator, but as a member of our community and a good friend. And for that, he doesn't have to worry about my support.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks a lot.
So if I was a smart politician, I would say thank you for coming and walk out, because the series of things that have been said are better than anything I could possibly convey. But thank you all. I wasn't sure what Nick had in mind when he did a lineup like that. But it really is a wonderful thing to be in the Upper Valley the day before you do your formal launch of a campaign. Because tomorrow I'm going to be in a different county with a crew of people trying to share a vision for the state of Vermont. And being able to do it in the place where, in many ways, as David will tell you, I was raised, and with people who helped raise my family, and people who were willing to house hunks working on my campaign, and my mother-in-law who is here, who is the only reason I get away with any of this political stuff, because she and Dave are so amazing as parts of our family. It's wonderful to be here. And also to have someone like Becca say a few words. Because, I can't believe you hesitated a moment to reach out to me, because in fact what you are doing right now is exactly what we need all young Vermonters to be doing, which is stepping up. And whether it's running for office, and I want to point out, she represents more people than I did until I was well into my 30s, so she may not have known she'd leapt into that level. But what she's bringing is a fresh perspective, and a fresh perspective that is about all perspectives. And that's what we need right now in the state of Vermont. I've had an incredible number of opportunities in my life. I'm raising my family in the farmhouse where I grew up. I was able to have the opportunity to grow a business in Vermont, in Wilder, to over 100 employees. I was able to work for Bill Clinton in heading up AmeriCorps Vista, where we empowered thousands of people out of poverty. And today I get to work out of the tip-top bread factory building, working for a company like Google, overseeing a team that makes a difference all over North and South America. And the only reason I've been able to do any of that is because of Vermont. Right? It was Vermont that allowed those opportunities, because we all know that what it's about is not what you get, but what you give. And what I want to be able to do is give all Vermonters whether they're in Burlington or Bennington, they're in Reigate or they're in Rutland, they're in Guilford or they're in Guildhall, the opportunity to chart out their future right here. And over the last several weeks, I guess it's been 5 weeks, Nick, we traveled to 19 different communities and listened to Vermonters in all 14 counties. And I wasn't sure how it was going to work. We went to Rutland, and there was, 40 people there. We were like, all right, maybe this will work. But it's Rutland, it's big. And then we went to Guildhall, and there were 35 people in the living room who were ready to talk about Vermont's future. And we saw some inspiring things. We saw tech companies that are changing markets both locally and globally. We met farmers who are shipping specialty foods all over the country. We saw people who are reinventing the way that you deliver education, and individuals who are building new forms of housing that are net zero efficient and allowing for people who are low income to actually be sustainable over a period of time as they build up their assets. And we saw over and over again the beauty of the state of Vermont and the fact that every corner has its amazing hills and valleys and is simply unique. And the beer. The beer. The world-class beer that we tasted from one end of the state to the other was fantastic. And we literally thought we were on this tasting process. It was quite extraordinary. But we also spent time listening to people's concerns. And I want to say that for the first time, I saw a different side of Vermont. That leaves me really concerned. I talked to a couple in Franklin County who each of them drive 3 hours a day to get their kids to childcare, to get to work, to get back to childcare, and to get to home. I talked to a couple in Addison County who are moving away because one person in the couple lost their job, can't find another one in her field, and they need to move to be able to make ends meet, but yet talking to a business person in Warren who can't find people to hire. I saw the impact of, on a southern Vermont county, of the fact that poverty has risen in that county by 50% since 2000, and learned that 10% of the children in the North Hero schools are homeless. I heard from Vermonters who had come out to a political event over a year before an election, who actually were questioning whether it mattered if they went to town meeting or ran to the school board. I'm running for governor because we need to make sure that we maintain the sense of community that we have had in this state. And I know that because it was a Vermont community that raised me, right? It was, as Kevin knows, although he didn't reference, that same magnificent father I had passed away when he was 39, 6 years younger than I am today. And we were fortunate to live in a place like Heartland, which was my rock, my backstop. Our neighbors cooked meals. They helped out with the chores. They made sure we had enough wood for the winter because he passed away the day after Christmas. And when I started doing the bills for the household, because that's what you do, I had mentors to help me figure out just how to do that. And that's what we do, and that's who we are, and that's how Sarah and I are raising our children. And we need to make sure that we do not lose that sense of spirit. And I believe that the way that we are going to solve for the problems that are here today, the cynicism and the poverty and the challenges that we are facing in our educational systems and our healthcare systems, is to make sure that we are building an economy that works for all Vermonters and works for all of Vermont. And an economy that works for all of Vermont is not going to be doing the business the same way that we've been doing it before. It's going to be making sure that our economic development energy is not going out and trying to recruit some big company to land a corporate campus in the middle of our state, but instead bringing capital and support to our entrepreneurs that are right here. An economy that works for all of Vermont is one that actually builds high-speed internet to the last mile of every town and village in the state, so we can unleash that incredible potential. An economy that works for all Vermonters and all of Vermont protects our prime ag land, but also makes it easier to redevelop our abandoned industrial sites. And an economy that works for all Vermonters and for all of Vermont is one that tackles our healthcare issues, that moves beyond a website that doesn't work and makes it work, but that makes sure we continue to move on a path to universal healthcare, because as we all know, healthcare is a human right. And an economy that works for all of Vermont is one that understands that an economy that works means everyone is being lifted, and launches a micro-enterprise investment program to help people who are in poverty or displaced to be able to start their own businesses and rebuild a middle class. And an economy that works for all of Vermont is one that invests in our community-based schools, that makes sure that we have the best connection to our parents, to our community, to those assets that we can't calculate on a tax bill, so that we can have the best rural education in America. But all of this is going to take making sure that we rebuild some trust. Because as I mentioned, some of the concern that I've been hearing in various parts of the state is that people who may have been fired up 10 years ago, full of hope and excitement, are not sure whether or not government is working for them anymore, and not sure if they really need to get involved. And in fact, there have been some things that have happened in Montpelier over the last couple of years, which Kevin got to see firsthand, which make people wonder if Montpelier may be getting like Washington. We can't let that happen. To me, it's past time that we had an ethics commission so everyone knew what the rules were and where we all stood to start that road to building back confidence. And if we do that, we can be successful in building that economy that we all want. But in order to get there, we need everyone involved. It can't be just the same people who have been involved in the process in the past. We need young people, and we need people doing tech startups. We need people who are struggling to get by, and we need people who volunteer for their local nonprofit day after day, but don't realize that politics is a way to make a difference as well. We need people who are getting up before dawn and are coming home after their kids are in bed. And we need a special group of people that do not include Becca and me, but are the Vermonters who no longer live in Vermont. People who grew up here, moved away for a job, and want to come home. So people like Sue, who have been involved with my other campaigns, know I don't run conventional campaigns. And this is where I'm going to need all of your help. Because we need people who are out there registering voters, who are out there showing that we're ready to walk the walk, that are willing to knock on thousands of doors and make those phone calls, and make sure that we're connecting with people on social media or on the phone or whatever medium they use. Because to create an economy that works for all of Vermont, we need all Vermonters. And we need them to know that they matter in this campaign, and they will matter in the next administration. As most of you know, because most of you have actually met them, Sarah and I have 3 kids, Judd, Abe, and Cora. And they are inspiring and exciting, and Sue will tell you, sometimes exhausting. And you know what I've discovered, and I think any parent will tell you, is that being a parent changes you. It changes your perspective, and it changes your priorities. And what it changed in me is a sense of urgency. And when I drop Abe, Cora, and Judd, usually on time at Hartland Elementary School, the elementary school where I went, I think about what I've been hearing around the state and the concerns that I have for Vermont. And I realize that the clock is ticking. So, if you agree with me that the time is now, and that we need to start with this campaign charting a new direction for our state, a direction that is steeped in the Vermont that we love, but also in the Vermont that we need to be. Please join with us so that we can start that journey today. Thank you all for coming out and for being a part of this campaign. Thank you. Go and rescue Sarah from those same 3 children, but are there any questions?
A lot of what you're saying sounds, as a Rotarian, I can say a lot of what you're saying sounds like the Rotary four-way test and the Rotary motto, which is service above self. Now, when you become governor,
Yes.
somebody, I don't know who, but somebody may ask you to join White River Rotary. What are you going to say to them?
Well, it would not be the last time that they would ask me to do that. And I would say I would love to appear in front of your gracious crew at any time, but I know that I would be fined over and over and over again if I was actually at that person.
Matt Busey did it.
That's true. That's true. Which is also connected to the speech from Calvin Coolidge that you taught me, which is that Vermont. Calvin Coolidge said this in 1926, 27 flood. He said that Vermonters are a race of pioneers who have nearly beggared themselves in service to others. We have continued that. We need to hold on to that. Did I miss a word?
No.
Okay, all right, good. Well taught. Yes?
Matt, so after 6 years of spending a lot of personal energy in the Healthcare is a Human Right campaign,
Yes.
at the Vermont Workers Center,
Yes.
And being betrayed by Governor Shumlin, I'd really like to know how you plan on financing Act 48,
Sure.
which is the universal health care bill.
Yep. So let me say that I shared your disappointment, and it was frustrating at a variety of levels. And one of the big ones comes to, and I'll just be blunt about this, the kind of experience that we need in leadership right now. Because the biggest barrier to us having universal health care, in my opinion, is a botched website. And that's a very frustrating thing. And I just want to be clear, because when I go around the state and I talk to people who were right there with us, who said, we see the math, we see what it's doing to our budget at our kitchen table, and to our schools, and to our state budget, year after year. Kevin has to deal with this year after year. You show up with a deficit because healthcare spending is continuing to rise a lot faster than the economy of the state of Vermont. That the botched website has lost people's trust in whether or not government can deliver anything. And that's a problem. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that we have our systems that work and people have confidence that government can deliver something that is a community good across the board. The second thing we need to do is change our reimbursement mechanism to go away from paying for volume. Because as folks may know, the way that hospitals and providers and others get paid is by how many procedures they can fit into an hour. Right? If they do that and they fill all the beds, then they make their number. That's crazy. And I serve on the board of Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center. And it's one of the more painful things to get at the end of the month and say, oh, we need to make sure we're finding more sick people in order to make our ends meet. That's insanity. So I believe that we can move, while we're still building that trust, to where we are actually paying for public health, where we are actually providing resources for providers to be able to take care of a community of people and create the incentives so that they take care of you at the right time, the cheapest time, that's right for everyone across the board. From there, I believe the next step would be universal primary care. And I think we're getting much, much closer to it, especially with the incredible network of community health clinics that are around the state, plus providers who have figured out they can't keep going the way that they've been going. And they want to get to that kind of delivery mechanism where they're being incented to do the right thing, not create a whole bunch of volume. And then at that point, I believe we can move to a true universal healthcare system where we are paying for it through a progressive mechanism, and we will not be stopped from doing it. But I would say, unlike 5 years ago, we've got some rebuilding to do to be able to get there. But I'll tell you, we've got to get there, otherwise we're all going to be crushed under the weight of the cost of healthcare. Does that answer your question? It's not an optimistic one, But I got to tell you, I'm not going to be the kind of person that tells you one thing and then lets you down over here. Those steps are real. Those are more aggressive than anyone else is talking about. And I think that is going to be our road to be able to get there. And we'll still be the first in the country to be able to do it. And then when Bernie is president, he will give us the waiver for Medicare and allow this to all happen. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, universal health care is a huge issue in any forum right now in this day and age. My concern for Vermont is more that quality of care. I moved my disabled mother to Vermont believing that it was going to be better for her, that her care would be more available, that I, as her primary caretaker, could earn a living wage and make sure that my mother was okay in staying out of nursing homes. It took 6 months to get set up through the Medicaid system. Doing that as a single mother with no pay was impossible. We finally got her in. There's no vision cover, no dental. I mean, it's really an issue of quality of health care and quality of life for our senior citizens in this state and in any other state. And while I would love to see everyone covered, I want to know that the people that really need it are going to get the care that they deserve. And I just didn't know what you think about that, if you have any plans for quality of life for seniors in Vermont.
Sure. No, and
It's a huge
absolutely.
issue for me, so.
And look, and I'm really hard. The situation that you were put in is not one that anyone should be put in.
No,
And that is
absolutely.
and I think there are a number of different contributors to that particular problem.
Right.
One is clearly the state is not being able to deliver the types of services and the information to you when you need it in order to be able to move through that quickly. It's clear that the state doesn't have the economy to be able to make sure that you have the job, to be able to be here and be supportive of your mom while you're working through that. And it's also clear that we have a system that doesn't have the capacity right now to be able to make sure that people are cared for in Medicaid. And look, when folks are showing up year after year, as an economy is continuing to slide and are making cuts to the most vulnerable and then eliminating frontline workers, the ones who are supposed to be taking the calls and being able to solve this for you, you're going to end, and then they have to raise taxes to make ends meet anyway. And this is year after year. We're not in a sustainable place. So I would, and I served on the Appropriations Committee in the Senate, and every single time it was my morals and my values that were put first to make sure that the most vulnerable was taken care of. With that said, I think if we don't do comprehensive approach to healthcare reform, we're just going to keep pushing one end of the balloon and have it come out someplace else. And so while that's inexcusable if that's the experience that you had, we need to take a look at it at a holistic level and look at it in terms of public health. So I hope that answers your question. I'm not, in fact, be curious to hear more about where were the problems along the way.
Yeah, it's just more of I want to make sure that the people that really need it in the place that I call home are getting the quality of care that they need
Absolutely.
on any level. So that's all. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? Great. And with that, I will let you go have your Sunday evening. Thank you so much for coming out, and I look forward to working with all of you in the year to come. Thank you.